In the middle of harvest season, Canadian farmers rely on massive combines worth millions that keep their farms running. For decades, many of these machines were made in Omaha, Nebraska. But this year, a significant change is underway. CLAAS is one of several companies that primarily serve farmers in the prairies. While the company has long manufactured its machines in Nebraska, it is now shifting Canadian production to Germany in response to the current trade climate. CLAAS, one of the world's largest combine makers, announced it will no longer produce machines for the Canadian market in the United States. Instead, production is moving to Harwinkel, Germany. This decision isn't about product quality or technology, it's about trade policy. By exporting from Germany, CLAAS can take advantage of the Canada-EU trade agreement, which eliminates most tariffs. Exporting from the US, on the other hand, exposes the company to uncertain new duties. A policy intended to bring manufacturing back to America has, ironically, pushed it away. When President Trump returned to office in 2025, he introduced a new wave of tariffs. The administration argued that higher duties would encourage multinational companies to produce more in the U.S., reducing dependence on imports and creating jobs. But CLAAS's move shows how that logic is faltering. Since Canada and the EU already have a free trade deal, it is cheaper and safer for CLAAS to serve Canadian clients from Germany. According to the European Commission, the Canada-EU agreement has eliminated tariffs on over 98% of goods between the two regions since 2017. That gives a German-made combine a clear advantage over one shipped from Omaha. The contradiction is striking. Shipping a machine across the Atlantic is now more cost-effective than moving it a few hundred miles to Saskatoon. Instead of attracting factories to the U.S., tariffs are pushing them abroad. Companies with operations in both the U.S. and Europe can simply sidestep the tariffs by producing for Canada in a country not affected by trade disputes. Experts warn that CLAAS may be just the beginning. The United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA, is up for renegotiation in 2026, adding more uncertainty for long-term supply chain planning. Firms prefer stable rules, and when they don't find them in the U.S., they look elsewhere. Meanwhile, Canada quietly benefits. Farmers in Saskatchewan still get the equipment they need, but prices are shaped by European trade preferences, not American tariffs. Ottawa doesn't have to spend political capital. It relies on existing agreements like the Canada-EU deal and is expanding partnerships, such as the economic agreement signed with Indonesia in September 2025. By staying open, Canada positions itself as a reliable partner, while the United States becomes less predictable. The lesson is clear. If it's cheaper to ship goods across an ocean than across a tariffed border, companies will do it. The result is an unintended consequence. The Trump administration aimed to restore American manufacturing, but the visible effect is a major firm moving Canadian production to Europe. This shift means fewer jobs and less investment in Nebraska, while Canada gains trust from trading partners. The pattern may extend to other sectors. Pharmaceuticals, automobiles, and lumber already face new duties announced in late September 2025. If more firms decide it's easier to produce abroad than navigate a tariff-heavy border, the impact will deepen. Trade policy isn't just about protection. It's about creating a stable environment for businesses to plan. Without that certainty, the backfire is almost guaranteed, leaving Canada to collect the benefits. Recently, Prime Minister Mark Carney delivered a strong address at a press conference in London. The moment arrived when a reporter challenged him directly, suggesting that he was simply traveling the globe without producing tangible results. "Conservatives say you're jetting around but not accomplishing anything," the journalist pressed. "You've met with numerous leaders, but you're not signing any new deals or announcing major partnerships. What concrete achievements can you point to for Canadians during this trip?" Rather than sidestepping the question, Carney highlighted new trade agreements, fresh partnerships, and discussions with global investors. "We are focused on building a new network of trade relationships worldwide," he explained. In June, Canada signed the EU Strategic Partnership for the Future to strengthen trade and economic security. Last week in Mexico, I worked with President Sheinbaum to launch a Canada-Mexico action plan aimed at creating new economic opportunities for our workers and businesses. While in the United Kingdom, I met with business and investment leaders to discuss fresh partnerships as we seek to attract capital to Canada. What seemed like a tough question quickly became an opportunity to showcase Canada's strategy. At a time when Washington is raising trade barriers, Canada is presenting itself as a welcoming destination for investment and collaboration. This moment mattered because Canadians at home are anxious. United States tariffs are threatening jobs, and families are concerned about rising costs. Carney's response in London wasn't just for the journalist in the room. It was for Canadians seeking reassurance that their government is acting with urgency and purpose. In London and New York, he met with some of the world's largest infrastructure funds, the type of investors who finance projects ranging from energy to digital networks. His message was clear. Canada is building a modern economy and will need hundreds of billions in investment over the next decade. Ottawa has already laid the groundwork. In its first 4 months, the government cut personal income taxes for over 22 million Canadians and reduced capital gains taxes. Federal barriers to interprovincial trade were removed, creating what Carney calls one Canadian economy. Legislation was passed to fast-track approvals for energy, artificial intelligence, critical minerals, and trade infrastructure. The Build Canada Homes initiative was launched to double the pace of residential construction. These reforms, combined with outreach to investors, aim to attract capital that might otherwise hesitate in today's uncertain environment. While President Trump's tariffs unsettle markets, Canada is signaling stability, predictability, and long-term opportunities for Canadian workers. For investors, the message is unmistakable. Canada is lowering domestic barriers while offering access to growing export markets. Funds are increasingly drawn to countries where governments act swiftly to approve projects and provide clarity on taxation. Carney's approach makes it clear that global capital is welcome and will be protected. Beyond investment, Canada is expanding trade. In September, it signed its first bilateral trade agreement with an ASEAN nation, Indonesia. The deal cuts or eliminates tariffs on 95% of Canadian exports to a country of more than 270 million people, projected by the IMF to become the world's fifth largest economy within 2 decades. Just days earlier, Carney unveiled the Canada-Mexico Action Plan, setting a roadmap for joint economic initiatives as both nations prepare for the upcoming USMCA review. In Europe, the Strategic Partnership for the Future signed in June is already moving into its second phase of negotiations. The framework ties into Europe's new SAFE initiative and the Rearm Europe plan, both involving hundreds of billions of euros in infrastructure and defense spending. Each of these moves pushes Canada further from relying on a single market. Trump's tariffs were meant to pressure Ottawa, but in practice they've accelerated Canada's shift toward Asia, Europe, and Mexico. What was intended to isolate has instead encouraged diversification. The contrast couldn't be clearer. In Washington, new tariffs on pharmaceuticals, furniture, and heavy trucks are creating waves of uncertainty. Meanwhile, in London, Carney is presenting a Canada that is signing deals, opening new doors, and positioning itself as a reliable partner for the future. A question that could have put him on the defensive instead became a chance to convey a broader message. Canada is not shrinking under pressure. It is using that very pressure to expand, reduce dependence, and strengthen its economy. For Canadians, the results will be seen in jobs, investment, and long-term security. For the United States, it's a reminder that trade wars often carry unintended consequences. Energy is another arena where the paradox is clear. A stark warning from the United States Energy Department projects Americans could face up to 800 hours of blackouts per year by 2030. That's more than a month without power. On Canada's Sunshine Coast, residents are opposing the idea of sending all the electricity from a local dam to the United States for 30 years. In British Columbia, what seemed like a routine export proposal has, well, become a national story. Powell River Energy applied for a license to send power to the United States until 2055, but residents, local business groups, and the Clawman First Nation quickly voiced strong opposition. For the United States, the timing is critical. Washington relies on Canadian energy to fill gaps caused by domestic project delays. Yet the Powell River case shows that assumption is far from certain. The dam once powered a paper mill for more than a century, and when the mill closed in 2021, output shifted south. What looked like an easy export now raises questions about local development and energy sovereignty. Here, a regional dispute intersects directly with the broader politics of Trump's tariff era. Tariffs were meant to strengthen American control over supply chains, but in many sectors, including energy, they've had the opposite effect. Duties of 25 to 50% on steel and aluminum increased construction costs for utilities, while tariffs on copper and other metals slowed new transmission and renewable projects. The United States Department of Energy reported in summer 2025 that grid expansion targets are already lagging. These delays make Canadian imports more valuable, but Powell River shows those imports are not guaranteed. Canada is no longer treating electricity as an unlimited export. Communities and provinces are pushing to keep more power at home. Trump's tariffs have created an energy paradox. Higher domestic project costs make the United States more dependent on outside supply, while giving Canada every reason to hold on to its resources. The opposition in Powell River is concrete. The Clawman First Nation and the Cranberry Business Group are redeveloping the mill site, pitching reliable local power to investors. Residents, organized through Energy Democracy for BC, warn that no one can predict regional energy needs in 2055. Even BC Hydro has filed under federal fair market rules. This debate reflects a broader trend. Ottawa has launched major projects, from LNG terminals on the Atlantic to cobalt refining in Ontario, aimed at keeping more value inside Canada. The longer tariffs persist, the stronger the incentive to build domestic industries instead of shipping resources to the United States. Powell River is one community, but its debate mirrors national policy direction. For Washington, the stakes go beyond a single license. United States manufacturers in border states already face higher energy costs. If Canada restricts exports, those costs rise further. Trump's strategy was meant to assert leverage, but it has produced the opposite effect. Canada is conserving energy and resources, while the United States faces growing uncertainty. The Powell River proposal is still under review, with a new public feedback deadline set for October 4th. But the broader message is clear: tariffs intended to guarantee American strength have encouraged Canadian communities to resist long-term deals and hold on to their assets. What began as a local dispute is now another example of Trump's trade and energy policies backfiring, leaving the United States with tougher choices about its own security. Meanwhile, President Trump stood before the world's leaders and sneered. In my view, it's the greatest con ever pulled on the world. Trump was right about everything, and I don't say that to brag, it's just true. He's been consistently right, at least in his own telling. Donald Trump returned to the United Nations this September, but what could have been a serious diplomatic moment instead turned into a spectacle. He began by complaining about an escalator, telling delegates, "I ended 7 wars, dealt with the leaders of each and every one of these countries, and never even received a phone call from the United Nations. All I got was an escalator that stopped in the middle." What followed was nearly an hour of bravado and insults. At one point, he declared, "Countries are going to hell." The scene made headlines, but for all the wrong reasons. What should have been leadership on the world stage came across as grievance and performance. While Trump was performing in New York, another story was unfolding across the border. The American economy, particularly industries connected to Canada, was showing signs of strain. The contradictions in his speech were glaring. He called climate policy a sham. If you don't get away from this green scam, your country is going to fail. He mocked the UN as ineffective, and now all they do is write a really strongly worded letter and then never follow it up. Yet, in a private meeting soon after, he softened. Our country is behind the United Nations 100%. I think the potential of the UN is incredible, really incredible. This disconnect isn't just words, it reflects a broader pattern. The reciprocal tariff regime introduced earlier this year was supposed to restore fairness, but it left scars with America's closest allies. Canada, facing duties on steel, aluminum, and autos, resisted and pulled back in ways that disrupt everyday economic ties. The effect is clear. Public opinion north of the border has soured, and numbers now show it. Canadians are avoiding the United States. Travel operators in upstate New York and northern states report fewer visitors during the critical summer season. Statistics Canada reported in July 2025 that Canadian trips to the United States dropped over 32% compared with July 2024. Day trips for shopping or gas fell 35%, and air travel dropped 16%. For the second consecutive month, more Americans traveled to Canada than Canadians to the United States, reversing a long-standing trend. This matters because Canada has historically been the largest source of foreign visitors to the United States. In 2024, Canadians made about 20 million visits, generating $20 billion in spending and supporting over 140,000 American jobs. With travel declining, that money and those jobs are disappearing. The impact is already visible. Tour operators in upstate New York report weak bookings. Air Canada reported an 11% drop in revenue on United States routes in the second quarter of 2025. Small-town businesses along the border are seeing emptier parking lots, weaker restaurant traffic, and lower retail sales. The reality is clear tariffs and tension are creating a boycott effect that's costing Americans real income. Trump built his second term on promises of strength at the United Nations, declaring, "Trump was right about everything, but the evidence tells a different story. Tariffs intended to pressure Canada are draining American communities. Tourism, airlines, and border economies are suffering, the very sectors meant to be protected." The irony is stark. While Trump made headlines taunting world leaders in New York, the real story unfolded quietly along the northern border. Canadians stayed home. Billions in spending evaporated. American jobs were put at risk. What was intended to project strength has instead become one of the clearest examples of a policy backfire.